the song of the water. If you listen carefully, at this very spot under the bridge, you'll hear a melody. You know, I never knew my father.
Miraculous is honestly one of the most perplexing shows out right now. I'd wager the majority of people who've seen clips from it probably have the funniest perception of it imaginable. So what did I do? I dived right in, thinking, yeah, this is gonna be like Code Lyoko in terms of its episode structure, and the narrative beats are probably gonna be a familiar foe. And boy, was I right. So why subject myself to a random French cartoon for seemingly no reason other than I think it's weird? It's not like I make videos to point and laugh at things, even if I do occasionally have harsh critiques to make. The answer is simple. I saw a mountain, and I wanted to climb it. Plus, I've already seen every single episode of Riverdale, so I don't think there's a string of words in the English language that can unwound the fabric of my mind.
Mr. Andrews, nice haircut. Looking extremely Dilfy today.
Let's take an honest look at Miraculous, Tales of Ladybug and Cat Noir. Miraculous is a show that borrows heavily from the magical girl genre, specifically drawing its inspiration from the seminal work that is Sailor Moon. Savvy viewers might also notice that its transformation sequences and narrative beats feel a little closer to something like Kamen Rider or Super Sentai when it comes to the visuals. I've always liked the overlap between things like Sailor Moon and things like Power Rangers, and I feel like this show combines the best of both worlds. Despite its main inspirations being things like Sailor Moon and Spider-Man, the narrative backdrop is Paris, France. For French viewers, these details are probably a cheesy way to integrate French culture into a story, but for international audiences like myself, it's a fun spin on French culture. The story is about our protagonists Marinette Dupin-Cheng and Adrien Agreste, and their journey as they struggle to balance their regular lives with the responsibilities they have as heroes. During the day, Marinette is a fairly clumsy and awkward girl that excels at craftsmanship and creativity. She also has a huge crush on Adrien Agreste, which, combined with her clumsiness, makes it impossible for her to express that in a healthy and meaningful way to him. She attends a public school, her parents own a bakery, and she's shown to be of mixed Chinese heritage on her mother's side. She has a transformation device, which is called a Miraculous, and hers is named Tiki. With Tiki's help, she's able to turn into Ladybug, whose special ability is Lucky Charm, which creates special items to stop unique villains. While the item itself is usually innocuous, her heightened awareness usually helps her instantly find a way to win. There's an intentional contrast between her clumsiness and how she excels in her craft because it mirrors her confidence and ingenuity as a hero and her romantic inexperience as herself. On the other hand, Adrien is the son of a wealthy designer who hasn't been able to go to school and make friends and memories until very recently, owing to his overly protective father. He's often seen as this talented and cool guy, but he's more interested in having a normal life and being treated just like everybody else. His relationship with his dad feels somewhat strained, if not at least distant, and I think it's implied that his mother is dead, or at least she's thought to be. With the help of his Miraculous, named Plague, Adrien turns into Cat Noir, which just means black cat in context. His special ability is Cataclysm, which can destroy anything it makes contact with, but he only has one use of it, so he has to exercise some restraint. His ability to destroy anything with Cataclysm is often used alongside Lucky Charm because their powers alone are decent, but working together, they're unstoppable. Much like Marinette, his perception and personality swap quite a bit when he's acting as Cat Noir. Since he's free from the expectation to be this rich, famous and cool guy, he acts like a cheesy goofball, which is quite normal for someone his age. We know that black cats are often seen as quite unlucky when it comes to superstition, so having the unlucky black cat paired with the lucky ladybug is a fun way of creating a balanced dynamic when it comes to fighting evildoers. But every story needs a big bad guy, so who's the villain of this one? The third major player in the story is Adrien's father, Gabriel Agreste. He's a famous fashion designer by day, but a villain named Hawkmoth by night. He holds the butterfly Miraculous, which allows him to send a butterfly to people to akumatize them, exacerbating negative thoughts and emotions, creating a villain that is evilized by those emotions. And the motif that each villain has reflects the skills or aspirations they have in life. So we have a story where Marinette has a crush on Adrien, and Cat Noir has a crush on Ladybug, but not Marinette. And guess what? Ladybug doesn't find Cat Noir attractive at all, despite kissing him in one of the episodes. She seems to think of him as more of a little brother or a friend, and the disconnect between these feelings and identities is where the romantic comedy aspect of the show flourishes. Of course, I imagine it gets even more complicated as the seasons go on, especially when you consider that Cat Noir's father is the one trying to take away their powers all the time. If you're wondering about their origin story, that's the finale of the season, and I'm not really interested in covering it because it's better to experience that as a complete package since it's the only arc that feels continuous during the first season. Now that we've set the stage, let's look at the narrative of Ladybug and Cat Noir to see if I can discover why it's so popular. I'm definitely not the target demographic, but given that I like things like tokusatsu, I feel like I can still give it an earnest try. It's easy enough for me to dismiss the narrative substance of something because it's a show primarily for children, and I'm not going to make it sound deeper than it really is. Before we look at some of the episodes, the basic narrative structure is as follows. Someone goes through some emotional turmoil, generally someone that's related to the students from the school. As a result, Hawkmoth engages in some fancy wordplay before turning them into a new villain. They get the power to realize their goals in exchange for seizing the Miraculouses from Cat Noir and Ladybug. Both Marinette and Adrien find a convenient reason to sneak away from whatever they're doing, and never seem to notice that the other went missing under suspicious circumstances. Because guess what? They both disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Our heroes then struggle with the villain's gimmick at first, but with their special moves they tend to overcome any obstacle. After the heroes defeat the villain, they destroy the source of their akumatization, returning them back to normal. Despite the consequences of their villainous rampages, the characters of the story tend to be quite sympathetic to the fact that the villain's actions aren't the true actions and feelings of the people who transformed into them. Consequently, the people who underwent evilization learn something about themselves and their internal strife is resolved. If you're thinking this sounds just like Power Rangers or Kamen Rider, don't worry, I thought the exact same thing, which is why I made this short edit to demonstrate how similar they are to me. The 15th episode of the show is called Gamer. It acts as this kind of love letter to video games because it's not just about playing video games for the setting, there's actually quite a bit of attention to detail when it comes to references and visuals. Marinette finds out that the two highest ranked players in a fighting game at school are allowed to represent the school in a fighting game tournament for Mecha Strike 3. Seeing the chance for her to spend a lot of private time with Adrien, she decides to try and beat Max's high score so she can participate in the tournament. When Max is challenged by Marinette, he begins explaining the rules in a somewhat condescending way, to which Marinette replies that she knows how to play and she's not a noob. I know that some people might eye-roll that a children's cartoon has some one-off bit about mansplaining a game to a girl, but I've been to plenty of gaming conventions a fair few times in my life and that kind of stuff really does happen. Anyway, the episode goes on to show that Marinette is not just an experienced player, but she plays by using two of her fingers hanging over the face buttons, indicating that she's trained a lot when it comes to her inputs in this game. Marinette wipes the floor with Max and thoroughly embarrasses him despite his earlier comments. People cheer her on while describing how badly he just got beat up. While it's not exactly Marinette's fault for hurting his pride because she doesn't really do anything unsportsmanlike after winning, other kids put him down to make him feel self-conscious. When it comes to competitive video games, I'd wager that you probably have a friend that plays an unhealthy amount of solo League of Legends or something like that. And when you ask them why they do that, you hear the most unreasonable answer like to prove I can do it despite how unhappy it clearly makes them. It's not uncommon for people to tie a part of their self-worth into how good they are at a video game, because when you're skilled at something specific, that's part of who you are. And when that is challenged by failure and loss, it becomes hard to reconcile what exactly gives you worth. I personally don't think of my skills in games as my value as a person, but it's honestly quite a common personality trait amongst the people that I know. While I think that his presumption that Marinette would be a new player because she's a girl is a terrible look for him, I'm not sure that I'd argue that her being a girl is the primary reason he's humiliated. In his monologue before he turns into Gamer, he's more frustrated with feeling that his hard work should be rewarded than the fact that he lost to a girl. I think the point that girls can be gamers too is pretty direct as far as imparting messages to children go, and we see that reflected in her dialogue for the rest of the episode. In this episode, we get a look at Marinette's room and we see that there is a lot of merchandise and pictures of Adrien, which is kind of weird, but I guess it's more exaggerated than anything. And I read it as more of someone being into something like K-pop idols and decorating their rooms with like photo cards and merch, which is not too absurd to believe, honestly. As Adrien comes over to train in the game with her, we see how much her parents try to support her despite how much it annoys her. Her parents keep coming into her room offering food, but after declining numerous times, it's actually Adrien that accepts the food they offer. He thinks her dad's pie is great, and then they run into the villain named Gamer that's running rampant. I don't think that feeling that your parents are overbearing is necessarily a negative trait, and honestly, I think a lot of the things that our families can do can embarrass us. But when you consider that Adrien doesn't have a close relationship with his father, he probably thinks it's really nice that she has such a good relationship with her family. Since our heroes have both come into contact with this villain named Gamer, they both have to find convenient excuses to become Ladybug and Cat Noir. After transforming into their hero selves, they start piloting a big mecha which honestly feels like they just got their own Megazord, and they shoot off a bunch of one-liners and gaming references to things like Street Fighter before stopping Gamer from running rampant. At the end of the episode, Marinette offers her spot in the tournament to Max because she isn't really passionate about gaming to the same extent that he is, and he shows genuine appreciation for the sentiment. If you've never seen the episode, you're probably thinking, isn't she just taking pity on him because she's better? And honestly, you're only half correct. She's acting out of compassion because she only knocked him out of the tournament to fulfill her own selfish desires, but it's Adrian that recognizes that he's less skilled than her, so he gives up his own position for her to play alongside Max. They spent the episode fighting together against him, now she's fighting alongside Max for the sake of the school. This was a nice episode because it allowed Marinette to look at her actions and how they affect other people, and while she doesn't go out of her way to be cruel or rude to people, she can still unintentionally hurt others without meaning to. I don't think her relinquishing her position in the tournament should be reduced to simply pitying someone who's worse than her. It's the gesture of allowing people who want an opportunity that she doesn't. Even though she ends up playing alongside Max and winning everything for the school, the fact that she was willing to look beyond her self-interest to give Max a chance to bring glory to the school shows the kind of compassion that Marinette is continually striving to expand upon. I like this episode because it allows the writers to show that obsession with Adrian can create selfish outcomes, instead of treating people that get hurt by her actions as collateral damage that she has no obligations to. The lesson is simple, but it doesn't make it any less thoughtful in my opinion. Kung Food is episode 16, and it's distinct from most episodes of the first season because it focuses on Marinette's heritage and culture as focal points of the story. Marinette's uncle Wang Cheng is visiting from China to compete in a cooking competition that would award him the honor of being the world's greatest chef. Accordingly, he's going to be judged by the elites of French society like the mayor and celebrities. Marinette is shown struggling to practice her Mandarin before stumbling through a greeting for her uncle. This episode is really distinct because Chloe is shown to be quite casually racist, which is insane to say about a children's show, but it's true. She asserts that soup isn't a real main dish because she hates soup, I guess, before saying that he should have just made sushi for the judges. This visibly upsets Marinette, and Adrian sticks up for her by explaining that sushi is Japanese cuisine, disapproving of her conflation of two different Asian cultures. Marinette is clearly struggling to find any connection to her uncle in this episode, and because of the language barrier between them, she thinks that he doesn't like her very much. This kind of insecurity might feel a little contrived for a plotline, but it's honestly quite realistic for the children of migrants to feel relatively divorced from their culture. Even if you speak the same language from people who share the same culture as you might have a distinct accent that makes you hard to understand, or maybe you're treated as if you're not really part of it. I think the balance between Chloe just being casually racist and Marinette struggling with her connection to her Chinese heritage is a nice bit of character development because the story is extremely episodic in the first season without the episodes feeling super interconnected with the lessons of each character. As Chloe says that she's never gonna vote for Marinette's uncle, insulting him for wanting to cook soup, Marinette goes out of her way to insult her fashion sense, stooping down to Chloe's level, motivating her to sabotage her uncle's dish. She puts a bunch of junk in it, making it basically inedible in retaliation. Thus, Uncle Cheng is humiliated, not just in front of the judges, but on live television because of the abysmal state of his cooking. Now that he's sufficiently embarrassed, in part due to his loss of face, which Adrian says is a big deal in China, Hawkmoth has a new villain to send after Ladybug and Cat Noir, and his name is Kung Food. He makes weapons out of food, and he mind controls anyone that eats his poisonous soup, including the judges who hated the sabotage dish. He appears to be influenced by Goku, which isn't that surprising considering that Goku's story in Dragon Ball is inspired by Journey to the West. Naturally, his facial markings are supposed to reference Sun Wukong from the same tale. The premise of Kung Food is where people are likely to feel disappointed by this episode. Despite showing Chloe's casual racism towards Marinette's uncle, and by extension the culture she's struggling to connect with in the episode, it feels like making her uncle a good cook and good at martial arts could be seen as quite orientalist in its interpretation of Chinese culture. I'm not super interested in telling people they ought to be offended by that interpretation, but it is a perspective worth considering when critiquing how representation is integrated into any story. I have researched and found that Uncle Cheng does show martial arts prowess later in the show, and Adrian does in fact say he's a great master to explain why he calls him Sifu. At first I thought he was just talking about being really good at cooking, and while I don't speak Mandarin myself, I have heard the term being used in contexts outside of martial arts. Anyway, in a best case scenario, he's kung fu'd because he knows both martial arts and culinary arts, not just because it's easy to make a pun without showing why the pun is made. Even with that charitable interpretation of the character, I can sympathize with people who feel a bit annoyed that Chinese food or martial arts are the only things you want to hammer home with the character. I get that he's related to Marinette's mom and they both cook different kinds of food, and it's not necessarily implied that these are the only good things that Chinese people are good for. But complex issues like cultural identity are rarely monolithic in their perspectives, and I'd wager that migrant viewers and mainland Chinese viewers may differ significantly on whether that's offensive. I'm not super interested in telling you which perspective is more valuable. I feel it's more important that you have the context of what some people dislike about this specific episode. Regardless of that, I appreciate the attempt being made to have Marinette tap into her culture and heritage, mostly because each episode feels somewhat formulaic and forgettable, whereas her background is rarely discussed in most of the episodes. I should also warn you that Netflix has the episodes uploaded in the completely wrong order, and that's how I watched it, so everything felt quite disconnected, so I had to actually review the show on a wiki in the correct episode order. Anyway, if you have any specific thoughts about Kung Fu as an episode and you're a fan of the show, let me know if you think the writing improves in the area of cultural sensitivity and representation, because I'm curious about that specifically. Back on track, Ladybug and Cat Noir stop Kung Fu by destroying his ingredients pouch and tying him up to save our racist pal Chloe, before destroying the Akuma inside of Kung Fu's chef hat. Chloe's removed from the jury for spoiling his food after the entire ordeal, and Marinette asks her uncle how to make celestial soup with him, bringing him more flowers to help with the recipe. Uncle Cheng becomes the best chef in the world and he renames his celestial soup to Marinette soup, because the flowers she gave to him helped make his soup, and despite the language barrier and cultural differences between them, he loves his niece very much. Overall, it's a very simple episode about connecting to one's heritage, and I think asking her uncle how to cook his famous dish was a very nice sentiment. If you're from an Asian culture, you've probably tried cooking that tastes different to how your mom makes it, partly because Asians don't really measure things, they kind of freestyle measuring, and also because each person's family members make it in a way that's unique to them. Learning to cook something the way that a family member makes it is a very direct way to connect with them in a really meaningful sense without speaking. You're not just learning about the flavor profiles they like to create in their food, it kind of grounds this mysterious and unknown quality about the food into something that you can measure. That special ingredient of familial love that you don't quite understand. You might not be able to speak Mandarin or fully understand what another family member might think of her, but going out of her way to engage with her culture and spend time with a family member she rarely sees is a really nice way of adding depth to her as a character. It's pretty obvious that every episode is going to be about her getting tangled up in some situation with Adrian, but seeing her take an interest in her heritage which she feels disconnected from is pretty interesting. Even if the premise of Kung Fu as a villain probably had mixed reception, I still appreciate that the show endeavors to touch on social issues, and I don't really mind if a piece of media has social commentary or not. I usually assess things on the merits of what's there, and while it's a decent attempt, I'm mostly thankful that a kid's show is bothering to try at all. The bar may be in hell, but I'm just being honest. I feel like if they've tried once, they're probably going to try again, which I can't know because I haven't seen the rest of the series. Now that we've looked at 2 episodes that very subtly touch on social issues while primarily focusing on personal development, I think I'm ready to give my thoughts on the first season as a whole. I realize that it probably gets better in the area of continuity, but I'm strictly going to talk about season 1 right now. I think that children's shows talk about morality and ideas in a pretty black and white sense, and it's simple to understand why they do. It makes for clear, concise storytelling. Talking about the nuances of struggling to be a better person can be a pretty heavy-handed subject for children to understand. That said, shows like Power Rangers, Kamen Rider, Spectacular Spider-Man, and Avatar have all dealt with complex looks at morality without just assuming that kids won't get it. Sometimes topics aren't too complicated to convey to a child, sometimes you just suck at explaining, like a lazy math teacher who thinks a student is beyond helping because of their knowledge gaps. I imagine later seasons of the show will endeavor to present a more nuanced look at overcoming negative traits, because at the end of the day, the cast of characters are children. I think that even a character who's expressed casual racism like Chloe, or people who instigate conflict should be given an opportunity to improve from that point. Redemption arcs can feel somewhat overdone in modern media, but I think a character like Chloe probably presents a decent opportunity to have someone reckon with their own selfish and oftentimes cruel behavior. I understand that she's substantially less sympathetic than our protagonist in Marinette, but if she's going to get worse, I'd at least expect her writing demonstrates a refusal to grapple with her own character flaws, than just have her as a generic vehicle for bullying to drive an episode forward. I feel that the kind of expectation I have to write a flawed character with nuance and grace is only a fair one if the show starts to move beyond its episodic structure, having more continuity between episodes and arcs. Having seen 0 episodes of season 2, I can't really say if that's the case or not. I think Ladybug Season 1 is a relatively enjoyable show that's going to appeal mostly to children, though if Bluey is any indicator, which still confuses me even though I'm from Australia, I'm sure it's hitting hard for many adults out there as well. I'm not the type of person that's interested in spinning kids' shows to be deeper than they really are, but in the episodes we discussed, it's clear that the writers are interested in imparting messages that subtly touch on social issues, while mostly focusing on lessons about personal development, which is a style of storytelling I really like, as I said in my Toku video. Watching each episode wasn't the most riveting thing in the world, since I'm not really invested in the romance of the main characters, but I've heard that the continuity between arcs and lasting character development makes subsequent seasons feel more engaging and emotional. I feel like if I watched the remainder of the show, I'd probably write a video about what I think about the show in its totality for a more holistic critique, as opposed to making a series simply reacting to and analysing each season, which isn't really my forte. I can tell the show honors its influences quite well, and the structure is going to work well for people who can look past things like corny dialogue and appreciate something adjacent to Sailor Moon or Power Rangers. A person gets a problem, they become the bad guy, our heroes use their signature powers at the right time to defeat him. It's honestly a decent time. But one season wasn't enough to dethrone the greatest French cartoon of all time for me, Code Lyoko, so I'll have to try and see the other seasons when I get the time. Will I be binging the remainder of this series? Probably not. If I revisit Ladybug and Cat Noir, I'll probably watch the entirety before I have anything new to say about it. If you're wondering why I'm even bothering to cover this show and reviewing 2 of the episodes, it's because I wanted to see if I could talk about something I'm not as passionate about as compared to my other videos. I can see why it's valuable, and I understand why it's fun for people, but I don't have the whole picture yet. But I do see the setup of something that could be great. Would I learn whether that was the case? Not really. There's 4 more seasons and a bunch of specials. But I hope you enjoyed my thoughts without feeling they were too overly critical. I felt like I was being fair in what I said about it, but the first season did leave me hungry for more in the area of writing, not in the area of wanting to watch more, if that makes sense. So if you thought this video was worse than usual, let me know, and I won't give up making videos like this one. I'll just make the next one better. Anyway, I've been Meatman. I somehow watched 26 episodes of this show, and I basically learned that this is just Kamen Rider for French children, and I hope you had fun, because I definitely had a couple chuckles here and there. Oh, and if you're curious, my favorite character was Adrian. Take it easy. See you next time.